Gilbert Galvan Jr. wasn't born a criminal. Somewhere along the way, between bad luck, bad choices, and a little too much charm, he just became one. It all started with a wrong check, a small mistake that landed him 18 months inside Joseph's correctional facility, a place where time dragged and hope checked out early. Gilbert knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to sit around and wait for life to get worse. Minimum security meant maximum opportunity. So one day he slipped out. No alarms, no big drama. Just a quiet exit and a lot of nerve. He found his way onto a truck and rode it straight into a new beginning. The sign ahead didn't say much, just Canadian border 1/2 mile ahead. But to him, it said everything. But in reality, the sign might as well have said, "Good luck, you're going to need it." Starting over sounded simple. Surviving it? That was a whole different story. Crime did not pay like it used to, and Gilbert was about to find out just how creative he needed to get to stay afloat. What he pulled off next was so unbelievable, it felt more like a crazy prank than a criminal career. And trust me, you're going to want to see how it all unfolds. After crossing into Canada, Gilbert Galvan Jr. was finally free. No handcuffs, no alarms, no angry guards chasing him down. Just him, the freezing cold, and a truck speeding away like it wanted no part of whatever trouble was coming next. Gilbert stood there for a second, taking it all in. New country, new chance. Now what? Problem was, Gilbert had no money, no ID, and no plan. Just a heavy coat of optimism, an empty stomach, and a smile that had gotten him through worse. He figured he'd try the honest route first, just to see where it might lead. Wandering the freezing streets of Ottawa, he spotted a flyer taped to a post. It read, "Delivery men needed." Nothing special, but at that moment, it looked a lot like hope. Gilbert adjusted his shirt and threw on his best "trust me" smile as he walked over, like he had done this 1,000 times. Before he could even get a word out, the guy behind the stand gave him a long look and asked, "You got ID?" Gilbert, thinking quick, grinned and said, "Left it in the car." Of course, he didn't have a car, or an ID, or even a real name he could use, but he wasn't about to let that ruin his day. Now he needed an ID. Fast. That's when he spotted a homeless man slouched nearby, watching the whole scene like he had seen it 100 times before. Gilbert leaned down and asked, "You got an ID?" The man grinned and said, $22. Gilbert didn't even hesitate. He handed over the money, and a few minutes later he was holding a shiny, laminated card with a new name, Robert Whiteman. It sounded just fake enough to work. Gilbert marched back to the vendor, flashed his new ID with a huge grin, and held his breath. The guy gave it a long look, then shrugged and said, "All right, Robert, you're in. Start tomorrow." For the first time since crossing the border, Gilbert felt like maybe things were turning around. Sure, selling popsicles on a bicycle around town wasn't exactly living the dream, but it was honest work, or at least it was close enough. After finishing his first exhausting day, Gilbert was cold, tired, and still broke, but he was surviving. That night, trying to find a place to crash, he wandered into a small church's hostel. It looked warm and safe, two things he desperately needed. He knocked on the door and waited. Just when he was about to give up, the door creaked open. Standing there was Andrea. Kind eyes, a guarded expression, and the sort of look you give someone when you're already wondering if you'll regret letting them in. "Are you all right?" she asked. Gilbert, running on nothing but instinct and charm, threw together a story about needing a place to stay. Half truth, half survival tactic. Andrea didn't ask too many questions. She just nodded and let him inside. They ended up talking in the common room. Andrea asked simple things like what he did and where he was from. Gilbert kept it light, just answering what she asked. No more than that. The conversation was easy but quiet, like both of them were feeling their way through it. Then Andrea looked at him and said, "Bad things happen to good people." Gilbert paused, and for the first time in a long while, he smiled. Really smiled. "You've read Kushner," he said. Andrea held his gaze, and in that moment, something clicked. No big moments, no drama, just something real. After everything he had been running from, it felt like he was finally running towards something instead. But reality wasn't about to let him off that easily. A few days later, after another long shift riding around the city with a box full of melting popsicles, His boss called him over. The man didn't even try to sugarcoat it. "We're cutting back. You're out." Gilbert blinked. "You still owe me $200, he said, trying to keep calm. The boss just shrugged like it wasn't his problem. "Sorry, can't afford it." Just like that, Gilbert was back where he started. Broke, jobless, and freezing. But this time, his name was everywhere. The headlines about his prison break were all over the papers, and it was only a matter of time before things caught up with him. He had a fake ID now, a bit of hope, and Andrea, someone who made him believe things could actually change. But he knew if he stayed, he'd be putting her at risk. The pressure was building fast, so he decided to head west, hoping Vancouver would bring better luck. But the economy was a mess. Finding real work was like chasing smoke. Gilbert bounced between odd jobs, and the best he could land was a part-time dishwasher gig that didn't even pay minimum wage. He was barely scraping by. While he was looking for jobs, Robert called Andrea. Her voice was shaking. She told him she was pregnant. In that moment, everything changed. Gilbert wasn't just surviving anymore. He was going to be a dad, and he needed real money fast. So he went back to the bank and looked closer. He checked the layout, the cameras, the security routines. This wasn't a risk anymore. It was a plan. The next day, Gilbert rented a cheap security uniform from a costume shop and introduced himself as Bill from Institution Security. With a fake badge and a clipboard in hand, he walked into banks like he was sent there to keep them safe. Managers didn't just believe him, they welcomed him. No one questioned the guy who looked like he was doing them a favor. While inspecting, Gilbert started noticing things, big things. Almost every bank had minimum security, one guard maybe, a couple of cameras. Most of them were cutting costs and crossing their fingers nothing bad would happen. It was like an open invitation. Gilbert realized if he played it smart, he could rob banks without even breaking a sweat. But if he wanted to keep doing it without getting caught, he needed more than just a uniform. He needed a new face. He signed up for prosthetic classes like a man on a mission. It wasn't exactly the career move he imagined, but desperate times called for desperate transformations. He learned how to reshape his nose, change the lines of his face, and move differently, anything to blend in. When it came time for his first real robbery in disguise, things did not exactly go smoothly. Gilbert walked in, playing it cool, sticking to the plan. But halfway through, as the teller was handing over the cash, she paused, looked up at him and said, Sir, your nose is falling off." Gilbert froze. He gave his nose a quick push back into place, like it was no big deal, and motioned for the teller to keep going. She shrugged and kept stuffing cash into a small pouch before handing it over like it was just another Tuesday afternoon. Gilbert grabbed the pouch, still trying to look professional, and without thinking blurted out, "How did I do?" The teller, clearly too stunned to process how ridiculous it all was, just nodded slowly. Then, dead serious, she said, "Work on your penmanship." I could barely read the note. Gilbert almost laughed, but somehow managed to hold it together until he was out the door. It wasn't smooth, but it worked. His first robbery was sloppy, awkward, and completely insane. Yet it paid him a good, hefty stack of cash. Still buzzing with adrenaline, Gilbert headed straight to the airport, stuffing the cash under his clothes. His heart pounded as he stood in line, convinced every guard could see right through him. When it was finally his turn, he nervously handed over his boarding pass. The staff barely glanced at it and smiled and mentioned casually, "Carry-ons aren't checked on domestic flights." Gilbert nearly passed out from relief. He realized he could fly anywhere across Canada with costumes, disguises, and piles of stolen cash, and nobody would even blink. It wasn't just luck, it was an open-door opportunity, and Gilbert Galvin Jr. was just getting started. Back home, things were finally starting to look better. Gilbert used the cash to move Andrea into a nicer house. When Gilbert showed her the house, Andrea asked the question he knew was coming. "How can we even afford this?" Gilbert smiled and spun a quick story. He told her he had reconnected with his father and that his father had helped him land a better security job. Andrea believed him. She wanted to. So did Gilbert, in a way. But the truth was, if he wanted to keep this life going, he needed bigger help. That's when Tommy K came in. Tommy wasn't just connected. He was the guy who could open doors that Gilbert didn't even know existed. Tommy didn't waste time with small talk. He wanted to know if Gilbert was serious. Gilbert made a wild promise. "I can rob a bank in 3 minutes," he said without blinking. Tommy raised an eyebrow. "Prove it." Dressed like a regular maintenance worker, carrying a beat-up toolbox, Gilbert walked into a bank like he was there to fix a leak. No nerves, no hesitation. 3 minutes later, he walked back out, a small fortune tucked away, like he had just finished patching drywall. From a distance, Tommy watched it all unfold, arms crossed, nodding in approval. Gilbert had delivered exactly what he promised. No mistakes, no witnesses, no noise. Tommy shook his hand right there. "We're in this together now." After that, everything got bigger. The jobs, the payouts, the risk. Together, they pulled off 59 heists, hitting banks across Canada like ghosts. They raked in over $2.339 million, moving city to city, job to job, without leaving a real trail. Gilbert became a master of blending in. One week he was an old man with a cane, the next a slick-looking guy in a leather jacket and wig. Sometimes he showed up dressed like a laid-back hippie with dreadlocks, other times rocking big sunglasses and a curly wig, slipping through crowds like he belonged there. New disguises, new places, new names. They kept moving, and all that was left behind were rumors. But no matter how good you are, nothing stays hidden forever. Andrea started noticing cracks. Meanwhile, detectives Hoffman and John had been tracking Gilbert and Tommy for months. Every time they got close, the two would vanish just in time, like ghosts slipping through fingers. Then after the 59th heist, Gilbert did something nobody expected. He stopped. The birth of his child changed everything. No more robberies, no more fake names. For 18 months, he lived a normal life of diapers, bills, and late nights. For a while it was enough, but money doesn't last forever. 2 kids, mounting bills. Gilbert realized the one thing he had always been great at was the one thing he had tried to leave behind. Out of options, he planned one more job in Pembroke. No drama, no mistakes. But what he didn't know was that Hoffman and John had been waiting. They had mapped his every move, learned his patterns, and when Gilbert returned to Ontario, they were ready. There was no escape this time. No clever disguise, no fast getaway, just cold steel cuffs and the heavy silence of an ending. The investigation that followed stunned even the toughest detectives. 59 jobs, millions stolen, hundreds of disguises. And still, Gilbert never gave up on Tommy. Not once. Loyalty ran deeper than regret. In the end, it didn't matter. Gilbert was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Andrea filed for divorce. Life outside moved on without him while he stayed frozen behind bars, replaying the same choices over and over. When he finally got out, Gilbert didn't try to vanish again. No fake names, no scams, no fast getaways. He found honest work as a truck driver, hauling goods across the country. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. He saw his daughters during scheduled visits. One of them even graduated, tucked proud moments into a quiet life. He had once dreamed of fortune and freedom. Instead, he found something simpler, a steady road, a life without running, without pretending. Just the hum of the engine and a man who finally understood that peace isn't something you steal, it's something you build. Turns out, the greatest getaway he ever pulled off was from his old life.